Welcome back to G Fun Facts Online. Today, we are traveling back 5,000 years, not to the stone pyramids of Egypt or the ziggurats of Babylon, but to the sun-baked plains of southwestern Iran. Specifically, we are going to talk about mud. It might not sound glamorous, but beneath the modern soil of Khuzestan lies the ghost of a civilization that built an empire entirely out of clay. This is the world of the Proto-Elamites. They flourished around 3200 BCE, right at the dawn of human urbanization. For over a century, archaeologists treated this culture as the poor relation to their famous neighbors in Mesopotamia, the Sumerians. We all know the Sumerians. They gave us the Epic of Gilgamesh, kings and floods. But the Proto-Elamites were different. They didn't leave us epic poetry or hymns to gods. They left us their receipts. Thousands of them. And in these receipts lies a story of a sophisticated, ruthless administrative machine that managed an industrial-scale economy before the invention of money, markets, or the wheel as we know them. So settle in, because we are going to decode the secrets of the clay bureaucracy. To understand this world, we have to look at the city of Susa. Around 3100 BCE, the ancient Near East was exploding with activity. To the west, the city of Uruk was becoming a metropolis. But in the east, in the Zagros foothills, Susa was undergoing a radical transformation. Archaeologists call this moment schismogenesis. That is a fancy way of saying a deliberate cultural breakaway. The elites of Susa decided they were not Sumerian. They changed their pottery, their art, and most importantly, their writing. They created what we now call the Proto-Elamite script. This wasn't writing for the sake of art. Writing in the ancient world didn't begin so people could write love letters. It began so the warehouse manager could make sure nobody was stealing the grain. The Proto-Elamites took the idea of writing and turned it into a technology of absolute control. Unlike the cuneiform of Mesopotamia, which used wedge shapes, Proto-Elamite was a linear script. It was written in straight horizontal lines, reading from right to left. The tablets they produced are thick, pillow-shaped lumps of clay. And they are masterpieces of functional minimalism. They are the spreadsheets of the ancient world. Now I want you to imagine the economy of this time. This is the most critical part to understand. There was no money. You could not go to a market to buy bread. You were likely a dependent laborer attached to a great household. These households were massive institutional estates that owned the land, the flocks, and the people. The economy worked on a system of rationing. You worked, and the household kept you alive. The clay tablets were the central nervous system of this redistribution. The level of detail on these tablets is terrifyingly efficient. They had different numerical systems for different goods. They used System D for grain. They used System B for discrete objects like jars. And they used System S for counting animals and humans. Let that sink in for a second. They used the same counting system for sheep as they did for human laborers. To the scribe, a worker was simply a unit of energy input. You fed a worker a specific unit of caloric maintenance, which was barley, and you expected a specific output of labor. It was a command economy run by accountants. Let's look at a specific example of how this worked. Imagine a tablet from the Acropolis of Susa. On the back, there is a seal impression of a lion mastering two bulls. On the front, there is a header representing the Department of Plow Oxen. The text would list the input of barley. But here is where it gets smart. They used predictive accounting. They didn't just record what happened. They recorded what should happen. A scribe would look at the amount of seed sown in a field and calculate the expected yield. If the harvest came in short, the farmer owed the difference to the state. They also calculated rations down to the liter. A male supervisor might get 60 liters of barley a month. A female laborer might get 30. A child, 20. These weren't random numbers. They were calculated to keep the workforce alive with zero surplus. This brings us to the human cost. Recent studies by scholars like Jacob Dahl have analyzed these texts and found something dark. The workers are often listed with no names, only numbers. They are grouped in gangs of dependent labor. And yes, there were children. The tablets list rations for young ones, indicating that as soon as a child could carry a basket or tend a lamb, they were put to work. The state did not distinguish between the labor of a beast of burden and the labor of a human child. Both were assets to be maximized. But the Proto-Elamite economy wasn't just about farming, it was about herding. The domain of this culture covered the Zagros Mountains, which meant pastoralism was huge. We have found tablets listing massive herds of sheep and goats. These weren't free-roaming shepherds living off the land. They were state employees. We have deciphered dairy tablets that are incredibly complex. The administration knew exactly how much milk a nanny goat should produce in a season. The shepherd was responsible for delivering that amount in processed cheese and butter oil. If he failed, he was in debt. The hair of the goat and the wool of the sheep were tracked into textile workshops, where female laborers wove cloth that was likely a major export. It was a factory system without machines. Now, we have to talk about the mystery of the script itself. I mentioned earlier that we can read the numbers. We know a tablet is about barley because we know the sign for barley. But the writing? The headers? The names? For a long time, we couldn't read them. And this brings us to a massive scholarly debate happening right now. For decades, it was assumed that Proto-Elamite was a real writing system, capable of recording language. But Professor Jacob Dahl from the University of Oxford proposed a theory called the collapse of knowledge. He noticed that over the few centuries the script was used, it didn't get better, it got worse. In Mesopotamia, scribes went to school. They copied standardized lists of words. In Iran, there is no evidence of schools. Dahl argues that the bureaucracy became so secretive and so complex that they forgot how to teach the writing system. Every scribe started making up their own signs. The system became bloated with thousands of unique symbols that only the guy who wrote them understood. Eventually, the system collapsed under its own weight. The scribes literally forgot what the signs meant, and the writing system died. It is a fascinating theory, a civilization that lost literacy because of bad management. But hold on, there is a counter-revolution happening. In 2020, French archaeologist Francois Dessat dropped a bombshell. He announced that he had deciphered a later script called Linear Elamite, used around 2300 BCE. And he claims that Linear Elamite is the direct descendant of our mysterious Proto-Elamite. Dessat used a set of silver vessels called the Gunagi vessels, which had bilingual inscriptions. By cross-referencing royal names, he unlocked the phonetic values of the signs. Dessat argues that Proto-Elamite wasn't a failed, chaotic system. He believes it was the world's oldest phonetic writing system. He thinks those chaotic signs represent syllables of the Elamite language. If he is right, the Proto-Elamites might have invented a phonetic alphabet centuries before the West. So we have a war of the scribes. Team Dahl says it was a failed administrative notation. Team Dessat says it was a sophisticated phonetic script. This debate highlights that history is still being written. We don't know the answer yet, but we do know about their art. While the scribes were busy counting, the artists were carving cylinder seals. These were small stone cylinders used to roll an image onto wet clay to sign a document. In this economy, your seal was your credit card and your ID. If a warehouse warden lost his seal, it was a catastrophe. The imagery on these seals is bizarre. In Sumer, you see kings. In Susa, you see monsters. A recurring theme is animals acting like humans. Lions rowing boats, bulls counting grain, bears drinking beer. It is a world turned upside down. One famous seal shows a bull-man figure sitting in a yogic, cross-legged position. He looks hauntingly like the Shiva figures found thousands of years later in India. This suggests that the Proto-Elamite world was a bridge between the Middle East and South Asia. This civilization eventually collapsed around 2700 BCE. The settlement shrank and the script vanished. Why? Maybe the bureaucracy was too top-heavy. It relied on extracting resources from a huge geographic area to feed the elite in Susa. Maybe the people just had enough. You can tax a farmer who is stuck to his field, but it is hard to tax a shepherd who can drive his flock into the mountains. The geography of Iran may have defeated the accountants, but their legacy is undeniable. They proved that an economy could be run by data. They were the world's first technocrats. They tried to bind the world together with mud, clay tablets to record it, clay seals to authorize it, and clay bricks to house it. As we stare at our digital spreadsheets today, we are looking at the great-grandchildren of those clay tablets from Susa. The medium has changed from mud to silicon, but the impulse remains the same: to count, to control, and to bring order to the chaos of human exchange. That is the story of the Proto-Elamites, the silent empire of mud that is finally beginning to speak. Thanks for listening to G Fun Facts Online.